So we are planning to create dashboards in collaboration with Chugtai Lab, wherein you should be able to input your biomarkers or report in data from your wearable sensors, and we could then predict using our models for you outcomes such as hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia as well, dyslipidemia, for example.
Welcome to Xgrid Talks. Today we'll talk about exploring the future of computational intelligence in healthcare. We have the privilege of hosting Safee Ullah Chaudhary, an accomplished expert in computational intelligence and healthcare applications. Safee holds a PhD in computational modeling of multi-scale cancer system biology. He is the CEO of CureLogix, an organization specializing in digitalization standardization in healthcare. Safee will provide us with valuable insights into transformative potential of computational intelligence, the role of digitalization in healthcare, and the importance of achieving seamless interoperability in the industry. Welcome, Safee Ullah Chaudhary, to Xgrid Talks. I mean, let's get started. So, what are you working on? So, there's computational intelligence techniques. What are you working on?
Yeah, so generally speaking, what we are doing in our lab is a mix of um, computer science, mathematics, biology, and healthcare. So together we try to formulate a problem that can be solved by looking at the various scientific advances in each one of these fields and bringing them together to bear upon a particular problem. So essentially an interdisciplinary lab, as is obvious from the name of our lab, Biomedical Informatics and Engineering Research. So this is the gambit of our work. We try to bring in data modeling, simulations, AI, and bear it upon healthcare problems, in particular cancer and diabetes. So that's a bird's eye view of what we do.
Can you elaborate on some of the specific computational intelligence techniques employed in healthcare applications, such as machine learning or artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so AI/ML has very wide-ranging applications, and what we do in our lab in specific is to enable applications to predict outcomes based on patients' input data. And for undertaking such predictions, we can do ML algorithms, and we learn from the training data. From the data, we look at detecting patterns and biomolecular signatures in particular that can not just diagnose but also provide a prognosis of disease for a patient. And along with that, we do diagnosis, we do treatment designs, we do drug discovery. So all of them have their own individual AI ML components. For instance, if I were to elaborate for diagnosis, ML would help us identify patterns in medical images, in histopathological images in particular, and then we could augment diagnosis by patient for patient care. For treatment, we'd want to create personalized treatment plans, and we could, incorporate individual medical history and other biomolecular features towards designing those treatments. And finally, a bit novel but important is the drug discovery part, wherein we are targeting to discover newer targets as well as new molecules to attack those targets. So this is, an overview of diagnosis, treatment, and drug discovery and ML applications in that sense.
Okay, that's great. So, what are some of the use cases or some of the problems that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so we are heavily focused on doing multi-scale modeling and simulation of cancer. So, every cancer patient is unique. And that is the fundamental reason why we haven't gotten an absolute cure for the disease till date. In fact, if two patients were to have the same type of cancer, they would still be different. So, with this background, if you look at the cancer care that's provided, let's say in Shaukat Khanam Hospital, then an overwhelming number of patients are given chemotherapy, which is a generic therapy, and it targets good and bad cells equally. So that is why probably chemotherapy kills more people than it cures. So cancer is within our interest of research. We also look at diabetes and its crosstalk with other comorbidities such as cardiovascular disorders, renal dysfunction, and we try to see how we can use data integrative approaches to build on detecting hyperglycemia, for instance, and eventually you could improve the quality of life for an individual who's expected to have diabetes in the longer term. Yeah.
Okay, how does all of this work together? Where do you collect the data? How do you sort of like process all of the data? How does it work?
So in terms of cancer, the data we get is mostly genomic data. So besides anthropometric measurements, familial history, and lifestyle information that we have on the patient, we also prefer genomic information such as the whole exome sequencing, bulk RNA-seq data. We are now looking at single-cell RNA-seq data as well, and we bring that together into a model, and these models are then personalized for an individual's genomic signature, and hence you have a, let's say, so to exemplify that for laymen, so if you were to have a colon cancer patient or a pancreatic cancer patient for that matter, Steve Jobs died of pancreatic
Hmm. Yeah.
cancer. Yeah, so if we were to look at pancreatic cancer, we would want to create a biomolecular network model, a big graph of, let's say, 5,000 genes that are interacting together. And you have a patient whose omics data is also available with you. So you create a sandwich of the network model with the patient data. So the network becomes personalized. And once that happens, you can pepper the network up with FDA approved targeted therapies or their combinations to see efficacious response as well as cytotoxicity that is induced by such an endeavor. So this is the approach that we take for cancer. For diabetes, we try to look at cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines in particular, because inflammation is a natural immune system response to pathology. So we can measure the levels of various cytokines. In fact, I remember in 2021, we had some collaborators from Norway and Gulab Devi who were working on tuberculosis, and we managed to figure out signature wherein we could determine the response to treatment in a patient. In TB, remember, it's very hard to measure the response of a patient. So if somehow we could create a signature that we could look at and see if a drug is working for a patient or not, and therefore the physician could change that drug, can be extremely useful in the clinic.
Okay, so this is like an individualized every person or every patient genome data and all of that, right? So how do you sort of like handle the issues of data privacies and data quality in such cases?
Yeah, so uh, it's a very loaded question. So
Mm-hmm.
so just let me break this down for
Mm-hmm.
myself. Okay, so in terms of data quality, obviously the more accurate data you have and the more complete data you have, the model becomes equally well informed. So this is extremely important for us. So what we do is that we work with, in particular, Shaukat Khanum, which is known for its high quality diagnostics data. We also incorporate data from the Cancer Genome Atlas, so TCGA. It's the world's most famous omics data platform, which already has cleaned and annotated data for individual cancer patients. So by relying on these well-known resources of data, we kind of ascertain that the background quality checks have been performed on the data and that the data is complete and consistent. So that much is for the quality.
Mm-hmm.
For the integration part, uh, so data is heterogeneous, all of this. So what we try to do is we bring together the pathway and the omics data into these network models. So we have to do a lot of normalization for data because the data is coming in from heterogeneous sources. And for that, there are statistical techniques that we leverage towards making the data seamless and integrated. And in terms of, I'm sorry, what was the last one? In terms of
Privacy.
privacy. Yeah, so patient privacy is an absolute must in our area of research. So, we obviously have to go through an IRB before we get a study going. But secondly, this data privacy has to be enforced through the IRB. So typically we work on pseudonymized data or de-identified data. We are not interested in looking at the personal information from the hospital, so they do not share it with us. But we reach back to them with the models and with the personalized therapeutics that we develop for pseudonymized data sets. So that part is not entertained at our lab, and we are, kind of siloed from that.
So, in terms of integration of these diverse digital health technologies that are out there, like wearables and EHRs and mobile apps and all of this, do you bring in all of that data also in?
Yes, so Saad, the thing is that now we have HL7 Fire, and we do a lot of data interoperability. So first the data has to be standardized, and then it becomes interoperable. And there is no better standard to do standardization than HL7 Fire. It's an international standard for health data interoperability facilitation. So that much is what we do. Um, we are also developing some platforms beyond HL7 Fire, such as the Health Information Exchange. Currently, in fact, we're working on Pakistan Health Information Exchange, which envisages to integrate diagnostic labs, hospitals, even the 1122 service into a giant network or exchange of health data. So integration is a key problem in Pakistan, where the health IT infrastructure is underdeveloped. But yes, we have it right in the crosshair to take it forward in the next few years, inshallah.
Yeah, so in terms of examples of how these technologies can be effectively integrated within the existing healthcare ecosystem, can you mention some of the examples?
Yeah. So for instance, okay, so let's look at the three major healthcare providers in Lahore. So one of them is Shaukat Khanum Hospital. The other is let's consider a diagnostic center, Chuktai, for that matter. And the third one would be 1122, the emergency responders. So what we could do is, what we do is, we place HL7 Fire adapters at each one of these health data warehouses, and then the data from the database is sipped up, standardized, and served to the partners that are connected to the network. So in this way, we kind of muzzle the healthcare databases with HL7 Fire adapters, so they start speaking standardized healthcare data, and then we connect them through infrastructure at a higher level, and therefore you are able to communicate health data across the network. So obviously you could add more players, you could add more diagnostics, you could add pharmacies, you could even add government, wherein the health ministry could look at, for example, the number of ventilators that are available at any given point in time, in real time, or if they're looking for the inventory of a drug, then the government should be able to know which hospital has which inventory at one particular time. So this kind of health networking system is called a health information exchange, and we leverage that to address the integration.
How about the other players within this ecosystem, the healthcare practitioners and patients? So, how do you ensure the benefits of computational intelligence to them?
Yeah. So the whole idea of personalized therapeutics is to deliver the outcomes from these computational experiments back to the hospital, and the doctor is positioned to dispense the outcomes from these computational models to the patient, or the doctor might not choose to deliver them to the patient, because after all, these are computational models and data driven therapeutic combinations, and the doctor knows much better as to which case to be administered with such a combination and which case should not be forwarded. So we leave that to the healthcare practitioners and do not intervene beyond the data analytics layer.
But in terms of like patient or the individual level, how can they make use of all of this data that is out there? Let's just suppose if somebody has to do some growth, some personal health hacking, how can that person employ all of these data that is out there or models that are out there?
Okay, so to be accurate, we are not patient facing at this moment. We're not serving these very data-driven and complicated models to the patients on ourselves, because typically these models are well placed in a tertiary care center at a specialized care hospital. So I'm not too sure if serving of such models for the popular audience might be a great idea. I'm not too sure about that. But
Mhm.
having said that, for the cancer part, for diabetes, for heart disease and others, yes. So we are planning to create dashboards in collaboration with Juktai Lab, wherein you should be able to input your biomarkers, or you know uh, you could probably put in data from your wearable sensors, and we could then predict using our models for you outcomes such as hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia as well, and dyslipidemia, for example. So that much is useful for the popular audience, but for the combinatorial therapies of cancer, that's too specialized for serving directly to the population.
So, how does all of this play a role in personalized medicine and proactive healthcare interventions?
Okay, so personalized medicine is um, it becomes more useful as the disease becomes complicated. So, for instance, if one mutation were to cause one disease, hypothetically, then you would not need personalization in any way. You would just have one molecule putting up with one mutation and solving that disease for everyone homogeneously. But as soon as a disease becomes multifactorial, complicated, and the context also becomes important, then personalization of therapies becomes relevant. So personalization is only relevant for multifactorial health variables. For instance, for diabetes, it's a multifactorial disorder. You have a lifestyle coming in right there, you have a familial history coming in as well, then you have mutations in your genome that you might have accumulated due to certain epigenetic or genetic factors. So all of these, when they come together, then it becomes a worthwhile problem for personalization. And that part, I think it's very important that patients, they gather as much data as possible from their wearable health sensors, as well as from their diagnostic profile. So you should keep your lab reports up your sleeve for a longer period of time, for you to be able to see the progress of your health in that regard.
So, let's just come towards some of the ethical and legal challenges. So, are there any algorithmic biases, data privacy issues, and also the potential of all of this replacing human judgment?
Yes, there is a lot of potential to replace human judgment in there. For instance, in histopath images, you have the uh, technician sitting on a microscope for the whole day and looking at slides. Yeah, and most of those slides, they have very rudimentary and superficial features which are very easy to detect. So in that case, an image processor, an AI-driven image processor would be really useful. So let's say 95% of the work will just be routed to AI, while the specialized, more complicated cases could be, put up for human inspection. So clearly, it would replace a lot of human effort. I'm sorry. But then again, AI is not yet ready for completely replacing the human. And more so, it just popped up in my head. You know, in health sciences, explainability is very important. You got to know, as a physician, as an oncologist for that matter, why does one drug combination work, and why does the other very famous or more famous drug combination not work. So this explainability is still missing. The interpretability is lagging in multiple models of cancer systems biology. But of course, people are making rapid advances in interpretability and explainable AI. So we are only ready to reap those benefits.
So, what approaches do you follow to validate and evaluate the performance and safety of these intelligence algorithms in healthcare settings?
So as soon as we get a sample from a cancer patient in the hospital, in particular Shaukat Khanam, so we split those samples three ways. So the one part of the tissue is sent to the hospital for their purposes. The second part is sent to LUMS for our research validation, and third part is stored. So from one of these parts, what we do is we further derive patient cell lines and organoids. We develop these in the wet lab. So we have a replica of patient's tumor in the wet lab as well. And then from the computational AI approaches, we create these combinations of therapies which are evaluated to be most efficacious, and we test them in the wet lab on the tissue sample of the patient first. And then the findings from those are shortlisted and forwarded to the hospital for their own administrative purposes. So there is a in silico validation, there is an in vitro validation in the experimental lab, and finally there is an in vivo validation in the patient.
Okay, that's great. So, in terms of regulatory frameworks, what frameworks are there around this? And obviously, dealing with the sensitive high health data, can you give maybe the HIPAAs and GDPR?
Okay, so you see, before a drug makes it to the general population, it has to go through clinical trials. So those clinical trials have 4 stages. I'll not go into the detail of that. But generally speaking, so a drug molecule has to go through these clinical trials, and then it is available for public use. In our case, what we do is we use AI to use these FDA approved drugs which have gone through clinical trial, and we create combinations of them for administration to the patients. So that much is safe for us for that particular cancer. However, sometimes it also happens that a drug that has failed clinical trials behaves very efficaciously for certain subset of patients. So that much then becomes very, very difficult for us to administer in the hospital. So this is like off the shelf, off target effects. So we are not into that. We just stay focused on FDA approved drugs and that are utilized by the patients for repurposing and for the repurposing and repositioning of the drugs. We do not have the capacity at this moment to trial such molecules or combinations. And as far as data storage is concerned, so all of the data that comes from the hospital is, it's through secure channels, of course, and then there is HIPAA compliance on the side of the hospital, and we comply by the IRB rules and regulations for data sharing and usage. So this entire pipeline from the hospital till the high performance computing end in our lab, this is all regulated by at each step by the relevant regulatory frameworks.
Okay, that's great. So, just one question. Obviously, you're discarding quite a few potential therapies that are out there that could work for a certain subset. Do you believe down the road there will be a case where you said every cancer patient is different? Can a particular cancer patient comes in and you say, okay, this molecule and this compound in these variations will work for this particular person? That's it. Is this possible down in future down the road?
Well, so this is actually here already. So let me just give you an example. We have a colleague who's known by what's his name? Okay, Atal Bhute. He's the okay. Let me just write that in the chat. Maybe I can put
Sure,
the name
sure,
later.
sure, sure.
So Dr. Bhute is the director at Biomed in University of California. So he got famous for using an antihistamine molecule. When we get allergy, so we use these antihistamines to suppress the immune system, right? So it's a very different purpose. So he used that molecule to to treat small cell lung carcinoma. So and with very high efficacy. So it's a different molecule which has a very different purpose, which is being applied to a very different disease, and the results were just amazing. So they were eventually given an FDA approval. So we call this drug repurposing. So if a drug has a purpose, we do not use that drug for that purpose, but we find a newer purpose for that drug. This is already there. So there are off targets that are available in the market. I cannot, I don't want to talk about them, but then people use it for their own efficacious ends, and it has worked. There was this guy, Dr. Martin, who's famous for his endeavors in AI. He got saved by a drug that was rejected in clinical trials, and he's doing very well. So there are stories of people who are healing themselves by looking at these data-driven models and fighting their cancer back.
So how on all of these models, how do you bring in lifestyles and nutrition and some of the other components, uh, which might be difficult to quantify, but do are you guys looking at it, or is it not the part of the study at all?
So I think so. Let me add a bit of biology at this point. So please always consider all lifestyles to be impacting your genome. So they'll leave an imprint on your genome or epigenome. Okay. So what we then do is we look at your whole genome sequence. We look at your histone expressions, that is epigenome, and we look at how those genes are transcribed into RNA. So we are actually looking at all of your history through the genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and so on and so forth. So very naive halwa puri or soft drink might actually be regulating a few of your, let's say, diabetes or lipid synthesis related genes, which we can see in the lab. So for a naive listener, you might have heard about HbA1c test. So that's a 3 months history of your sugar uptake.
Sure.
Yeah, so you can imagine an extension of that. So we can look at your genome and try to see what kind of um misnourishment an individual has gone through, and we could see the effect of that on the whole body. So that's pretty doable. This is what genetics and epigenetics is.
Yeah, so this is where my sort of like previous question comes in. So if you can actually look at it on an individual basis and say, okay, stop doing this, stop eating this, stop doing this, and in next 10 years you will be free from this. Is this a possibility?
Gene therapies, okay, so well, it's not it is scientifically this is possible, but in terms of rolling it out in the general population, there is a caveat. And for instance, if somebody has a let's create a new gene called diabetes gene. Okay, so if somebody has a diabetes gene, I can come to your DNA with a scissor. We call it CRISPR. Yeah, CRISPR-Cas system, and we can cut that genome out of your DNA and we can replace it with the healthy sequence of nucleotides. That is the healthy sequence of the gene without the mutation, and you will be fine. Yeah, so this is something that we do in science all the time. Yeah, gene editing is a norm. However, putting it out in the general population, China has given a go ahead on that. You can imagine people vouching for designer babies and other things. So there is a lot of hue and cry from in particular Europe and US, where this is tightly regulated. But it is a scientific reality. In fact, recently the Nobel Prize was given on CRISPR-Cas to two ladies, Dr. Carpenter and what was the name of the other one? Dodna. Yeah, there were two people who co-invented the CRISPR-Cas system, which is useful in gene editing, and it's a hot technology out there.
Okay, that's good. So let's come towards the scalability and resource requirements. So how do you scale all of these resources when obviously these are very, very hungry, and you need a lot of computational power to deploy all of these algorithms? So what are some of the techniques that you use?
Yeah, so the first thing you need for such an for such a data intensive endeavor is a high performance computer. So we use so obviously the resources are not infinite in our case. So what we have adopted to is GPU computing. So it's a high core setting, which was initially used for graphical processing, but we have repurposed it to scientific utilization and purposes. And what we do is we have our own HPC in our lab. We have built it in a way that we do not have a lot of nodes, but we have a lot of GPUs. So all the compute goes to the GPU, and then we settle the storage on network attached storage system. So this is an improvisation to catch up with the computational requirement of this field. And then, of course, on the wet lab side, you need the knock in, knock down, knock up systems. You need to have the cell line, cell culture facilities. And on the third side, the hospital, you need the biobank, because once you get the tissue out of the patient, it has to be handled with extreme care. You can lose the RNA expression in that tissue sample within seconds. Yeah, so you have to put it in, we call it shock freeze. So we put it in liquid nitrogen, the tissue, and then we crush it for onward processing for DNA extraction, RNA extraction, etc. So it's a very high cost maneuver that cuts across hospitals, wet labs, and computational labs. But this is what is needed to get this job done.
Yeah. So how do you improve the efficiency in these particular? I mean, so many multi parties and all of that, and obviously without compromising any of your accuracy.
Yeah, so one very straightforward way is to work with those collaborators that are conscious of these quality parameters. Obviously, if we were looking at patient samples from a hospital that did not take care of the sample in the initial few minutes of the extraction, then we'll probably not find any RNA expression in there. So we are very selective in choosing our collaborators. So that is the easiest way to handle this problem. Secondly, what we have to do is to maintain the cold chain for the samples. And obviously, if that is broken, if the sample has been extracted well, but during transportation, during processing in the wet lab, if the sample breaks, then the work is lost as well. So again, there the cold chain has to be maintained. And then once the data comes out, then it's anybody's task, because then you don't have to worry about the sample anymore. So it's a very delicate and careful process that you have to run.
Now let's talk about collaboration and knowledge sharing. So there are healthcare professionals, there are researchers, industry stakeholders, regulators, and all of that. So how are you handling all of these stakeholders?
Yeah, so what we have been discussing for the last half an hour is something that's a rarity in Pakistan. It's very hard to explain to people what exactly are we doing. And once they get it, then they are in a state of surprise, because to enable this is another problem, right? With so many infrastructural limitations and procedural immaturities, it's very hard to conduct such a complicated operation. So what we do is we involve graduate students into this at a very early stage. So this is what we have been doing successfully for the last many years. Our PhD students, they start their journey right from the clinic. We ask them to go to the clinic. We want them to see how the sample is done and how valuable that resource is. And then they grow into their PhD, and eventually they end up doing cutting edge research. We're also actively involving our undergraduate students, who are, by the way, no less and very endowed. And for them, what we do is we start from their sophomore year towards the end of their second year. And in the remaining 2 years, they're continuously interning in the lab on the same project. So they're learning on the job. And then in the final year, they get their project, developed and executed. So this is what we do on the students front. In terms of general dissemination, we do publications in journals. So that is something that we take a lot of pride in. We target the top journals, and in particular special issues, which are focusing on the particular problem, and the peers which are from that very field, they come to the table and they review our work, and then the decisions for publication are made. And finally, of course, conferences and symposia and workshops. So we are open every summer. Our lab is literally flooded with not the monsoon, but the interns from across the country, and you know, uh, it's a Mina Bazaar of sorts during the summers.
That's really nice to have. So, what are some of the emerging trends and future directions that you're seeing in this particular field of computational intelligence in this healthcare industry?
I think the first need of an individual is health, followed by food, and then education. So health is perhaps, in my humble opinion, the first priority. And given the poor healthcare infrastructure in Pakistan, you have a market of 240 million people who are in need of healthcare, as is anyone else in the entire world. If you add the poor lifestyle and food preferences, then you can imagine the burden is likely to go up. We recently become perhaps the largest diabetic population in the world, and this speaks volumes of the quality of healthcare we have and the quality of lifestyle we are adhering to. So there is a lot of future in this, um, and I think the human resource quality in healthcare domain is also quite poor in Pakistan, which is quite counterintuitive, because Pakistan is famous for producing some of the finest physicians and surgeons in the world. In US, it's a norm to see a Pakistani doctor, even in UK and Europe. But within Pakistan, due to the brain drain, unfortunately do not have a lot of physicians and experienced doctors at work anymore. So not only that the disease burden is high, but also that the practitioners to address those disease burdens are also in limited numbers. You could simply summarize it by looking at patient to doctor ratio in the country, and I'm not sure it's a pleasant picture. I think it's a very poor ranking there as well. You could look at infant mortality, pneumonia, even polio. We couldn't get that eradicated. So the size of uh, the problem is proportional to the potential in that field. So I think it's pretty decent, and AI is beckoning us to skip one generation and move to the second step in one go, and come back with low resource requirement, data driven healthcare management frameworks, immunization programs, policy development, health exchanges, HIMS, EHR. So clearly it's a bad situation, but also a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, so just tell me about this ideal future you talked about that we'll skip this one step and just go there. What would that ideal solution look like within this emerging economy in or a third world country situation?
I think the first step has to come from the government in the form of a regulatory framework. Every hospital must absolutely have an HIMS or EHR. It should be a digitalized operation center. Number two, after the policy and regulators work, so HIMS is one. The second is all diagnostic labs should have a laboratory information management system. The days are numbered when we would copy data from Excel and email it to the government that we have these many COVID patients. That's a dead rubber issue that has to be removed. So HIMS at the hospital, LIMS at the diagnostic labs, and then for the pharmacies and the drugstores, they have to be connected to the central system, because uh, you know every drug molecule has a shelf life, and if there is a stock in a poor economy at a place where it's not being consumed, then it should become available to people who are in need at a different location. And that's not just for medicines, that's also true for equipment. For instance, in COVID, we were running after ventilators when several hospitals had excess of them, but nobody was using them, while at the other hospitals, you know, people were having co-occupancy on a single bed. So these kinds of things have to go. And then on top of them, between the government and these healthcare stakeholders, needs to be the national health information exchange, that kind of Facebook of, call it a Facebook of health data providers. So you could add hospitals and diagnostics and emergency responders, Ministry of Health for that matter, even law enforcement agencies. So they have no way of tracking. I was actually very surprised that You could not even tell the history of individuals who have substance abuse to their credit. So we need to get this uh, connectivity going. We need to get the digital infrastructure set up. We need the regulator to umbrella all of these implementations and make them mandatory. And finally, we need the ethical legal framework to come together with this establishment to create, you know, to address legal as well as ethical concerns that are obviously now being given rise to, in particular with AI. So this is a very complex topic, so I'll not go there, but I'll just stop at that.
Yeah, so that's a great into the discussion. So, anyway, Safee, where can people know about these initiatives? Where can they find you if you want to just talk about that?
So I'm reachable at my email. I prefer the emails. We have a website for our research lab at LUMS. So I'm an associate professor here, and I'm a group leader as well for biomedical informatics. So people can reach out to us through email. They can visit our website. We also have a startup company that does many of these things, and for Pakistan in particular. And I'm also available, for a personal visit if somebody wants to really take a look at how samples are taken from the hospitals and how they're processed for cancer therapies. I'll be very happy to have a cup of chai with them.
That'll be great. So, definitely we'll be meeting soon for that cup of chai.